The year was 1848, and Europe was a tinderbox simmering with discontent. For generations, kings and emperors had held unchecked power over the lives of their subjects. But then, the Industrial Revolution happened. This transformed economies and urban landscapes alike, creating new social tensions. A fledgling middle class increasingly demanded a political voice. The stage was set for a revolutionary year that would resonate for centuries to come. From the Parisian streets to the Prussian palaces, the monarchs of Europe would soon face the fury of their citizens. The people had found their voice, and they were determined to be heard. Our story begins on the sun-drenched shores of Sicily, an island then gripped under the iron fist of the Bourbon monarchy based in Naples. Despite its fertile fields and azure waters, it had been bled dry by years of mismanagement and exploitative feudal policies. In 1847, a cruel drought scorched the land, turning fields to dust and twisting olive branches into brittle claws. Crops withered under the unforgiving sun, leaving peasants to subsist on scraps of grass and bitter roots. Discontent, sharp as a stiletto, began to flicker in their eyes. Accusations like poisoned darts flew towards the opulent palace in Naples, aimed at King Ferdinand II and his crony aristocrats, who were rumored to hoard grain while their subjects starved. This simmering discontent boiled over in January 1848 in the vibrant heart of Palermo. On the 12th, a crowd began to form. With their faces hardened by hunger and defiance, they surged through the cobbled streets. Their voices, hoarse from years of silent suffering, roared loudly, "Viva la Costituzione!" Long live the Constitution, a clear demand for justice, a plea for a future not choked by dust and despair. The authorities, accustomed to wielding fear unimpeded, underestimated the storm they had unleashed. Police charged, their sabers flashing in the sun, but the crowd met them with a torrent of rocks and cobblestones. The barricades, hastily erected from overturned carts and scavenged timbers, became fortresses of resistance. Muskets crackled, spitting fire into the throng, but the revolutionaries, fueled by desperation and a newfound courage, fought back. The air, thick with the smell of gunpowder and sweat, vibrated with the cries of liberty. The uprising, like a brush fire, spread across the island. In the rolling hills of the countryside, peasants, their faces etched with generations of toil, stormed manor houses, settling old scores with pitchforks and righteous fury. The opulent churches, symbols of the hated aristocracy, became targets, their stained glass windows shattering under a hail of stones. By the end of January, Sicily was ablaze. The major cities echoed with the cheers of the victorious rebels. In Palermo, a provisional government, led by the steely-eyed Ruggero VII, a former minister who had thrown off the shackles of royal servitude, took the reins. Faced with this groundswell of defiance, King Ferdinand II, with his crown tilting precariously, was left with little choice. On February 11th, he finally conceded, granting Sicily a constitution and appointing Settimo as president of the parliament. Though order was restored for the moment, the flames of revolution had been ignited. The seemingly small, far-off island had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the indomitable human spirit. From its shores, the cries for liberty would echo across the continent, carried on the wings of wind, kindling similar fires in Paris, Prague, and beyond. The world was watching, and the old order, with its foundations crumbling, could only tremble in fear. From Sicily, the revolutionary sparks jumped across the Mediterranean Sea to Paris, the historic center of French political turbulence. In the decades since the 1789 revolution, France had seesawed between republics, empires, and monarchies. The latest King Louis Philippe, who took his turn at the throne after the 1830 revolt, initially enjoyed popularity and was known as a citizen's king. But his increasingly conservative policies and restrictions on dissent gradually disillusioned the public. The economic depression lasting from 1846 to 47 added fuel to the fire, with unemployment and bread shortages exacerbating public misery. Opposition groups began organizing reform banquets across France, circumventing laws against political gatherings. At one such banquet in Paris in February, crowds took to the streets chanting, "Down with Louis Philippe!" Violence quickly erupted, as protesters erected barricades and clashed with police forces across the city. For 2 days, Paris became a crucible of fire and fury. The cobblestones of the city streets transformed into battlegrounds, hastily fortified with furniture and debris. Behind these makeshift defenses, a motley crew of workers, students, and intellectuals fought for a new dawn. Their voices, hoarse from chants of liberty and equality, echoed through the smoke-choked air. Women, skirts hitched up, braved the chaos to carry ammunition and tend to the wounded, their eyes blazing with revolutionary fervor. As terrifying as it may sound, children even joined the fray, pelting soldiers with stones. The air thrummed with the symphony of clashing steel, the thunderous roar of muskets, and the anguished cries of the fallen. The city reeked of gunpowder and blood, a testament to the heavy price being paid. Finally, on the 24th, the tide turned. Exhausted and outnumbered, the Royal Guard faltered. Their lines fractured under the unrelenting pressure of the revolutionaries, their discipline crumbling like sandcastles in the face of the rising tide. News of their capitulation spread like wildfire, igniting cheers throughout the city. The crowd, their faces illuminated by 1,000 flickering torches, surged towards the Tuileries Palace, the very symbol of royal power. Finding the palace deserted, the revolutionaries poured through its gilded halls. In the golden afternoon sun, the Second Republic was proclaimed from the steps of the Hôtel de Ville. The cheers of the crowd, their voices hoarse from days of defiance, seemed to shake the very foundations of the city. A new chapter in French history had begun, written in the blood and ink of revolution. From the flames of Paris, the fire of liberty spread, casting its incandescent glow across Europe, inspiring other nations to rise and claim their own destinies. News of the Paris uprising, like a bolt of lightning splitting the European sky, electrified the German states. Across the patchwork quilt of 39 independent kingdoms and duchies, whispers of revolution morphed into thunderous calls for national unity and democratic reforms. For decades, the German Confederation had been held hostage by the iron grip of Austrian Chancellor Clemens von Metternich, a man who saw dissent as a weed to be choked out. His oppressive censorship and omnipresent surveillance cast a long shadow over the land, stifling the free exchange of ideas and snuffing out the flames of liberty. But beneath the surface, embers of discontent flickered, particularly in Prussia, the heartland of German power. In the capital city, Berlin, the pen of critic Ludwig Born became a weapon, his words echoing loudly through the streets. The people have been silent for a long time, but they are not dead. And in the March of 1848, the silence shattered. Popular uprisings erupted across German cities. On March 18th, Berlin became a crucible of revolution. A sea of humanity, their faces etched with a mix of hope and defiance, surged through the cobbled streets, their voices united in a single chant. We demand freedom. We demand a united Germany. But Metternich's shadow still loomed large. As the crowd pressed closer to the royal palace, Prussian soldiers, their faces grim under their spiked helmets, opened fire. The cobblestones ran red, each fallen protester a stark reminder of the cost of freedom. Yet from the blood-soaked streets, a defiant roar rose. Our dead shall not have died in vain, the crowd cried. We call for freedom and honor. We will not be silenced. King Frederick William was forced to yield. He promised liberal reforms, his words a fragile truce amidst the storm. In Vienna, the epicenter of Metternich's power, students and workers clamored for change, their voices a chorus of defiance echoing through the grand avenues. Metternich, his carefully constructed house of cards collapsing around him, finally resigned on March 13th. His departure, like a cracked dam, unleashed a torrent of celebration across German cities. Church bells pealed, bonfires blazed, and the air vibrated with the anthem of a people finally free. To harness the momentum of this national awakening, elections were held for an all-German National Assembly, a beacon of hope, christened the Frankfurt Parliament. Within its halls, delegates from across the land gathered, their voices a tapestry of dialects and ideologies, united by the dream of a single unified Germany. After months of passionate debate, they hammered out a constitutional framework, a blueprint for a constitutional monarchy that would bind the German states together. It was a vision of unity, a promise of a future where the ghosts of division would finally be laid to rest. But the path to unity was fraught with peril. Regional rivalries, deep-seated mistrust, and the waning support of monarchs like Prussia's Frederick William, who had initially promised reforms but harbored secret ambitions of his own, chipped away at the Assembly's fragile authority. By 1849, the dream of a unified Germany, once ablaze with revolutionary fervor, lay smoldering in the ashes. The Frankfurt Parliament, its promises unfulfilled, dissolved into a whimper. Yet the spark it ignited, the yearning for a nation united under the single German banner, would continue to flicker in the hearts of the people, waiting for the right moment or the right leader to once more burn the fires of revolution. As we hop on over to the sprawling Habsburg dynasty, a patchwork quilt of lands held together by the iron fist of Vienna. Within its grasp, Hungary simmered with the quiet fire of national identity, a yearning for independence that had been smoldering for decades. On March 15, 1848, that fire erupted into a blazing inferno. In the capital, Budapest, a young poet named Sándor Petőfi, his eyes ablaze with passion, stood before a crowd thronging the National Museum. In a voice that resonated through the cobbled streets, he recited his electrifying poem, National Song. His words, etched with a fiery resolve, cut through the air like a sword unsheathed. By the God of the Hungarians we vow, that slaves we shall no longer be. The crowd, their hearts ignited by Petőfi's call, erupted in a thunderous roar. A wave of souls surged through the city, their voices a chorus of liberty, their fists clenched in defiance. Hungarian soldiers, sent to quell the uprising, were swept away by the tide, their uniforms transforming from symbols of oppression to emblems of a nascent revolution. Within days, the flames of rebellion had spread across the land. Peasants, their faces etched with years of hardship, abandoned their fields to join the cause. Students, their minds aflame with revolutionary ideals, marched alongside seasoned soldiers. All united under the charismatic banner of Lajos Kossuth, a fiery orator who declared in a voice that shook the very foundations of Habsburg power, "The time of oppression is over. Hungary shall be free," he decried. In April of that year, the Diet of Hungary, its chambers echoing with the fervor of revolution, passed sweeping reforms proposed by Kossuth. Serfdom, a relic of a bygone era, was abolished. An independent Hungarian parliament was established, a beacon of hope for a nation finally breaking free from the shackles of Habsburg rule. But cracks quickly appeared within the foundations of the revolutionary movement. The path forward sparked heated debate. While Kossuth advocated for complete independence, a powerful faction, wary of a full-blown war with Austria, favored a negotiated settlement within the empire. These internal divisions cast long, ominous shadows as both sides mobilized their forces. By the summer of that same year, the air crackled with the anticipation of conflict. Finally, in September, the fragile peace shattered. The factions within Hungary, like a pack of defiant lions, roared into civil war. Early victories, like the Battle of Pakosd, where János Damjanich's ragtag army routed a Habsburg force, fueled the flames of hope. Images of Damjanic, his face etched with steely determination, circulated throughout the land, a symbol of hope and Hungarian valor. But the tide of war soon turned against the revolutionaries. Austria, its imperial army bolstered by the might of Russia, unleashed a torrent of steel and fire upon Hungary. Sadly, the Battle of Schwechat became a scene of carnage, where Hungarian ranks were decimated by Habsburg artillery. This marked a bloody turning point in the revolution. Joseph Bem, a legendary Hungarian general, surveyed the battlefield, his face a mask of grief. "My poor friends," he lamented, his voice hoarse from battle, "we have lost everything." Further attempts to resist militarily were like throwing pebbles against a raging sea. Budapest, the heart of the revolution, fell to the Austrians in January 1849. His dream of a free Hungary shattered. Kossuth fled into exile, carrying the weight of countless lives lost in the struggle. His writings suggest this affected him deeply for the rest of his life. The remaining rebel generals, like the valiant Artur Gorgé, fought on, their resolve a flicker in the gathering darkness. But the Austrian onslaught, spearheaded by heavy artillery and cavalry, proved too much to overcome. At the Battle of Temesvar in August, Gorgi, surrounded on all sides, was forced to surrender to the Russians. With his surrender, the revolution was extinguished in a brutal wave of repression. Rebel leaders were executed or imprisoned, their voices silenced forever. By September of 1849, Hungary, once a land of hope, lay once again under the heavy shadow of Habsburg rule. Kossuth, in a distant exile, mourned the lost cause. For decades, the embers of discontent had smoldered beneath the iron fist of Habsburg rule. Czech nationalists, their hearts yearning for self-determination, saw in the spreading flames a chance to break free. On June 11th, the city held its breath. Students, their eyes ablaze with youthful idealism, and intellectuals, their minds honed by years of dissent, surged through the ancient heart of Prague. Banners emblazoned with demands for autonomy and political reforms fluttered like defiant flags against the gray sky. A murmur of anticipation, laced with trepidation, hung heavy in the air, a melody composed of nervous whispers and the rhythmic tread of a people on the move. Clashes erupted like lightning strikes in a storm. The city square, once a bustling marketplace, transformed into a battlefield. Ink-stained hands, accustomed to wielding pens and crafting poems, met the cold steel of Austrian bayonets. The streets were ripped from their seams and piled high as makeshift barricades, hastily erected by cobblers and professors, poets and clerks. Behind these walls of defiance stood the defenders of Prague. Their faces, etched with a mosaic of hope and fear, told stories of sacrifice and dreams. Writers like Karl Borovsky, his words as potent as any musket, led the National Committee, a beacon of Czech aspirations. There was also young Frick, the student leader whose fiery speeches could move mountains. They became the voices of a generation yearning for freedom. News of the uprising spread like wildfire. From the bustling markets to the quiet courtyards, the spirit of rebellion took root. Artisans laid down their tools, shopkeepers shut their doors, and even the staid professors at Charles University joined the throngs filling the streets. Prague, in that moment, was a city united, a symphony of defiance played out on cobblestones and in whispered prayers. But the Habsburgs, like a slumbering giant awakened, were not to be trifled with. The Austrian military, a juggernaut of steel and discipline, marched on Prague. The city, its cobblestones slick with the first rains of summer, braced itself for the inevitable clash. Days bled into weeks as the battle for Prague raged. Barricades were stormed and retaken, streets ran red with blood, and the air echoed with the cracks of gunfire and the cries of liberty. The defenders, though outnumbered and outgunned, fought with the ferocity of cornered wolves. Havlicek's fiery words continued to inspire. Frick's rallying cries rang out through the smoke, and even the cobblestones seemed to fight back, spitting shrapnel at the Austrian invaders. But the tide of war is a fickle beast. The Austrian army, with its seemingly endless reserves of men and munitions, slowly began to overpower the rebels. One by one, the barricades fell, their defenders captured or killed. The National Committee, its hopes shattered, was forced to disband. The rest of the rebels, their faces etched with despair, were rounded up and imprisoned, their dreams of a free Bohemia shattered completely. Across the border in Vienna, the imperial Habsburg capital itself vibrated with the tremors of revolution. Students with eyes burning with idealism, workers hardened by toil, and middle-class professionals yearning for a voice joined forces in mass demonstrations. In March of that year, their demands for civil liberties from the ruling monarchy echoed through the grand avenues, a chorus of defiance that shook the very foundations of imperial power. Violent clashes erupted, staining the alleyways with blood. And for a moment, it seemed the tide of change was unstoppable. Prince Metternich, the Iron Chancellor who had held Europe in his icy grip for decades, was swept away by the storm. His resignation, a symbolic victory for the revolutionaries, ignited a brief hope that a new era was dawning. But Vienna, like a dance gone awry, soon stumbled into discord. The city, once a playground for gilded aristocrats and waltzing dandies, became a battleground. Students, their youthful idealism hardening into steely resolve, built barricades from cobblestones and overturned carriages. A story and cycle that should sound familiar about now, and unfortunately we know how this'll end. Workers, their hands calloused from a life of toil, brandished makeshift weapons against the Habsburg Guard. The air crackled with a mix of fear and defiance, a melody composed of gunshots and revolutionary anthems. On one side stood the revolutionaries, a motley crew united by a singular desire for change. Writers, their pens transformed into weapons, penned fiery articles that fanned the flames of rebellion. But on the other side loomed the Habsburg eagle, its iron talons poised to crush the rebellion. Emperor Franz Joseph, a young man with ice in his veins and steel in his gaze, authorized Field Marshal Windesgratz to unleash a storm of unrelenting artillery upon the city. Streets became avenues of destruction, each barricade a pyre upon which the hopes of the revolutionaries were consumed. Vienna, once a city of gilded balls, became a graveyard of dreams. Hundreds fell that May Day, their bodies a grim testament to the brutality with which the forces of reaction could respond. Public executions became a macabre spectacle, a stark reminder of the consequences of dissent. Press freedoms were curtailed, dissenters hunted down, and the dream of revolution, once a vibrant waltz, lay silent in the dust. The political wildfire of 1848, once a blazing inferno engulfing Europe, began to flicker and fade. The revolutionaries, drunk on idealism, stumbled upon the harsh realities of governance. Factions fractured, monarchies regrouped, and the initial euphoria gave way to disillusionment. Peasants, their fields neglected, yearned for stability. Aristocrats, their privileges threatened, saw revolution as a plague. And monarchs, sensing vulnerability, leaned on the cold steel of their armies to reclaim their thrones. In Hungary, the leaders watched in agony as Tsar Nicholas I's bear-like shadow fell upon their dreams of freedom. Austria, bolstered by Russian might, crushed the Hungarian rebels, their cries for liberty echoing unanswered across the plains. Frederick William of Prussia, initially wooed by the siren song of unity, ultimately recoiled from the revolutionary tide. The Frankfurt Parliament, its aspirations for a united Germany dashed, dissolved into a whimper. By 1849, the revolutionary wave had crashed upon the shores of reality. Leaders, their voices silenced, were exiled or imprisoned. The streets, once witness to jubilant marches, lay stained with the blood of martyrs. Yet, beneath the ashes of defeat, embers of hope still glowed. Kossuth, his fiery spirit undimmed, fled to distant shores, his words destined to inspire future generations of revolutionaries. Defeated Czech and German liberals, their dreams of autonomy unfulfilled, turned to the slow grind of political reform, their voices echoing in parliaments rather than barricades. Karl Schurz, his revolutionary spirit finding a new home across the Atlantic, brought the torch of liberty to a young America on the brink of its own struggle. The workers' barricades in Vienna and Paris, though dismantled, cast long shadows, foreshadowing the rise of labor movements across the continent. The seeds sown in 1848, though watered with blood and disappointment, bore fruit in the decades to come. Monarchies, once seemingly invincible, gradually yielded to the rising tide of democracy. The ideals of liberty and justice, once mere whispers in the wind, became rallying cries for millions. The martyrs, their brave sacrifices were not in vain. Their spirit lived on in the hearts of those who continued the march towards many of the freedoms we cherish today, a testament to the enduring human yearning for a better world. The springtime of nations may have been short-lived, but its tremors forever changed the landscape of our world, a harbinger of the revolutionary storms yet to come.